Binding of Isaac Rebirth is a game, or rather a remake of a game that is based heavily on the Bible. Most of the items, characters, and bosses have some amount of relation to the Bible. We could spend hours going over all the items in the game and how they relate to the Bible, but instead, I want to focus on three things. The 7 deadly sins, the 5 actually, horsemen, or harbingers of the apocalypse, and the characters.
Now I must warn you that this game is rated M for mature by the ESRB, but mostly for the obscene amounts of blood and implied drug use and common drop being unidentified pills with varying effects, some positive, some negative, but both will mostly be absent from this video. Most of the characters are taken straight from the Bible, with the exception being the blue baby, the wasp, and the keeper, and are often sinners. Isaac, the title character, is named after Isaac, son of Abraham, from the Bible. His story is very similar too. In the Bible, God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac to prove his faith. In direct parallel, a voice from above asked Isaac's mother to sacrifice him.
Isaac and his mother lived alone in a small house on a hill. Isaac kept to himself, drawing pictures and playing with his toys as his mom watched Christian broadcasts on the television. Life was simple, and they were both happy. That was until the day Isaac's mom heard a voice from above. "Your son has become corrupted by sin. He needs to be saved." "I will do my best to save him, my lord," Isaac's mother replied, rushing into Isaac's room, removing all that was evil from his life. Again, the voice called to her. "Isaac's soul is still corrupt. He needs to be cut off from all that is evil in this world and confess his sins." "I will follow your instructions, Lord. I have faith in thee," Isaac's mother replied, as she locked Isaac in his room, away from the evils of the world. One last time, Isaac's mom heard the voice of God calling to her. "You've done as I've asked, but I still question your devotion to me. To prove your faith, I will ask one more thing of you." "Yes, Lord, anything," Isaac's mother begged. "To prove your love and devotion, I require a sacrifice. Your son Isaac will be this sacrifice. Go into his room and end his life as an offering to me to prove you love me above all else." "Yes, Lord," she replied, grabbing a butcher's knife from the kitchen. Isaac, watching through a crack in his door, trembled in fear. Scrambling around his room to find a hiding place, he noticed a trapdoor to the basement hidden under his rug. Without hesitation, he flung open the hatch, just as his mother burst through his door and threw himself down into the unknown depths below.
Magdalene, or Maggie, is a reference to Mary Magdalene, who was a sinner saved by Jesus by having 7 demons cast out of her body. In a similar way, the player unlocks her by having 7 heart containers at any one time. And Cain is a reference to Cain from the Bible, who committed the first murder of his brother, Abel.
Judas is a reference to Judas Priest, a rock band from the 80s. Judas is a reference to Judas from the Bible, who was one of Jesus' disciples and betrayed Jesus. Question mark, question mark, question mark, or the blue baby, does not show up in the Bible but canonically in the game. It is Isaac after he dies from suffocation when he locks himself in a chest to hide from his mother.
Eve is, of course, Eve from the story of Adam and Eve from the book of Genesis, who was the first woman created by God and committed the original sin. Unless, of course, you count Lilith, but we'll get to her. Samson is a reference to Samson, who in the Bible had unnatural strength blessed upon him for following the Nazirite vow and not cutting his hair. Azazel was either an scapegoat for which he was sent to the wilderness to atone for a sin he did not commit, or B, a fallen angel who taught man how to craft weapons and jewelry, and taught women how to paint their faces, or use makeup, which is considered sinful. He is unlocked by doing 3 deals with the devil in one run.
Lazarus is in reference to Lazarus of Bethany, whom Jesus resurrects 4 days after his death. In parallel, Lazarus starts with an extra life. Eden is named after the Garden of Eden from the Book of Genesis. The lost doesn't appear in the Bible, but canonically is Isaac's soul. Lilith is either A, a Hebrew word that denotes a class of demon, or B, the real original woman created by God. There's a long, convoluted story of what happens to her and why she isn't included in most copies of the Bible, but for convenience, she is condemned for one reason or another and is banished from Eden, where God then creates Eve from Adam to Eve.
Lastly, the Keeper never appears in the Bible, nor is he related to Christianity at all. He is most likely related to Chiron of Greek mythology, as he uses coins instead of health and can only carry a maximum of 2 coins, 1 for each eye, which is traditional for Greek burials. The 7 deadly vices, or sins, appear as bosses in the game, all of which have varying attacks and item drops that fit them. They also have super versions, which are little more than harder versions of the regular boss.
Greed can be found in shop rooms, arcade rooms, and secret rooms, all of which typically have ways to make money or use money, or, like all sins, appear randomly in most any room. When greed hits the player loses health and drops money, often losing 1 penny amongst several more that drop onto the ground. When defeated, greed will drop several coins and can drop the Steam sale item, which will make all future purchases half price, or the head of the Keeper, which will cause enemies to drop more coins. There's also Super Greed, who is very similar to Greed, only that he can drop a quarter instead of the head of the Keeper.
Envy flies around the room and splits into smaller and smaller envies until he is destroyed completely. Super Envy is the exact same, except he splits 1 more time and splits in 3s rather than 2s. Gluttony moves somewhat slowly, fires 8 tears, which are the game's main weapon. In all directions, fires a laser to either side if the player is to Gluttony's side. Gluttony drops hearts and can drop the less than 3 item, which gives the player 1 extra heart container, or a bucket of lard, which gives the player 2 heart containers, but also slows them down. Super Gluttony fires a spray of tears directly at the player on top of the typical 8, and doesn't drop less than 3 item, only the bucket of lard.
Wrath throws live bombs in the player's cardinal direction, up, down, left, right. His appearance and fighting style is reminiscent of Bomberman from the Bomberman series of games. Wrath drops bombs and can drop Mr. Boom when defeated. Mr. Boom's an item that allows the player to drop 1 powerful bomb every once in a while. Super Wrath uses more powerful bombs than regular Wrath and can drop Mr. Mega, which turns all bombs the player uses to the same kind of bomb that Mr. Boom drops. Pride can drop 4 live bombs randomly in the room and shoot out 4 short-range lasers in an X pattern. He can drop a card, of which there are about 20, each having a different effect, and the Anarchist Cookbook, which has an effect similar to his ability to drop bombs randomly in the room. Super Pride shoots 6 tiers in all directions when using his X laser and spawns 2 powerful bombs rather than 4 regular ones. He can drop the Dead Cat item, which grants the player 9 lives.
Lust will quickly chase the player around the room in an attempt to catch the player to deal damage. Lust drops a random pill, of which has a random effect each run, and can drop the virus item, which will poison enemies that touch the player. Super Lust runs even faster and leaves a trail of creep in her wake, which will damage the player should it be stepped on. The creep will disappear after a few moments. Super Lust will drop the Yum Heart instead of the virus, which can be used to heal 1 heart every once in a while. Sloth will fire explosive tears at the player that leave a small amount of creep behind. He drops Bob's Rotten Head when defeated, which is a poison bomb that can be shot once every so often. Super Sloth will fire 2 explosive shots instead of 1 and drops Bob's Curse, which will make all bombs the player uses have a poison effect. Both Sloth's and Super Sloth's design are merely recloaks of regular enemies, thus mirroring their sin of laziness. Lastly, the only Ultra version of any sin, Ultra Pride.
Ultra Pride is modeled after the creator of the game, Edmund McMillen, and the small familiar is modeled after Florian Himst, who programmed the original Binding of Isaac game. Ultra Pride acts a lot more like Sloth than Pride, shooting homing tears and spraying horizontal line of creep along the ground. Florian will fire 1 homing tear every so often. Upon defeat, there's a very high chance that Ultra Pride will drop the left hand item, which will change most chests into red chests, which drop different items from other chests.
Finally, we have the 4, technically 5 horsemen or harbingers of the apocalypse, and the Headless Horseman. They each appear in the Book of Revelations, except Pestilence and the Headless Horseman, and are all more likely to spawn in the boss room if the player uses the Book of Revelations item. They all drop either the Ball of Bandages or a Cube of Meat item, unless otherwise specified, which are items that spawn a familiar that follows the player and gets stronger for each of the items the player collects.
First, Conquest, Rider of the White Horse. He fires homing tears in a plus pattern. charges across the room with multiple copies of himself, and releases beams of light from the sky. Conquest drops the white pony, which allows the player to fly over obstacles, charge across the screen, and summons the same beams of light Conquest uses.
Second, War, Rider of the Red Horse. Has 2 phases. War, while on his horse, will fire 8 tiers in all directions, summon 5 alive bombs around the room, and charge across the screen at high speeds. After he loses his mount, he will chase the player similarly to the Lust fight, however, he will stop occasionally.
Third, Famine, Rider of the Black Horse, also has 2 phases. While on his horse, he will charge across the screen and spawn flies to help him. In his second phase, he will reduce to only a head, and fire 3 tiers in the player's direction.
4. Death, Rider of the Pale Horse. Has 2 phases. While on his horse, he will spawn 4 slides that home on the player for a while, 2 sides that home in on the player until destroyed, and use the Hourglass item, which slows the player. On his second phase, he dismounts his horse, who will continuously charge across the screen until destroyed. And Death gains the ability to spawn the Knight enemy, who can only be attacked from one side.
Pestilence never appears in the Bible directly. He comes from this quote from chapter 6 of the Book of Revelations in regard to death. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. In his first phase, he flies around the room leaving behind creep, shoot explosive shots that leave creep behind them and explode, and spawns maggots to help him fight. In his second phase, he literally loses his head, and spawns flies instead of maggots. Lastly, we have the Headless Horseman, who has no relation to the Bible whatsoever, so we'll just skip him entirely.
This has been the Binding of Isaac and the Bible. Stay classy.